This will sound very strange, but a series of explosions in Iran in 2020 that tie back to Israel being behind these explosions are a prophecy that are pointing to the date that Israel will destroy, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities on April 26th, 2025. It is predicted that the US will participate in this bombing campaign. The date on which this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. If you have already watched this introductory information for this prediction that Israel and the US will bomb Iran on April 26th, you can skip ahead no more than 53 minutes. All right, now regarding this email and forensic notes PDF document that I just mentioned, I want to point out here that this prediction that Israel and the US will bomb Iran on April 26th, 2025 was made way back on March 7th, 2025. All right, now just to elaborate, it was on April 1st that it was first learned that the B-2 bombers are on Diego Garcia Island in the Indian Ocean in preparation for bombing Iran, okay? So in other words, what I am saying is that this prediction was made long before recent developments regarding the escalating possibility of Israel bombing Iran, which started in early April with two main things. One, the satellites showing that the B-2 bombers are now on Diego Garcia, 6 of them, which was a prophetic sign, which I explained in another video. And also in early April, Trump said that there were going to be talks, and specifically on April 12th, direct talks with Iran. And he said that during the week leading up to April 12th. And so when Trump said that there would be talks with Iran, this was long after this prediction was made on March 7th. Here's the forensic notes here. March 7th was the date that this was predicted. In other words, when this transpires, it would be irrational for you to say, well, you know, you could have discerned that it would be coming soon given recent events. No, no, no. This was known since March 7th, long before the recent developments that indicate that it's maybe still. Today is the 12th of April. It's still just a maybe possible that Israel will bomb Iran along with the US. But I'm also giving a specific date. It's April 26th. Now, you could say, well, given recent developments, you've got maybe the skeptic will say, well, maybe, you know, at this point on April 12th, there's a 20% chance. And if you just start making videos for every date, no, that's not how it's working. I've got the explanation and it's very clear and amazing and overwhelming how it is known that specifically April 26th will be the date. And again, I'll just repeat it one more time. I've known this since early March. And you will see that these videos give you the overwhelming information. I'm not saying it's going to happen on every single date. I'm not saying about any other date. It's only April 26th, and the information couldn't possibly have been created in a person's brain. There's no one creative enough to give these connections that will explain how it is that I know April 26th ahead of time. You are a fool if you think that someone could be creative enough to come up with these explanations. They are from God. And furthermore, one would have to be a crazy person to do such a thing. Create these examples for explanations for all of these dates, hopefully getting one of them correct. That would be a crazy person that would do that. And you are the crazy one if you think that someone like myself would do that. Now, also, if you would like, again, to have this email or forensic notes PDF documents forwarded to you, please let me know and I'll email them to you. If you have already watched this essential introductory information, you can skip ahead 36 minutes. Do not skip ahead if you have watched similar introductory information in a video about Harris's predicted plane crash or any other prediction. This introductory information is different for each prediction, and the differences in the information is essential for each prediction. God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections is only being explained on this channel. The full intended meaning of God's prophetic signs cannot be properly understood without their context and connections to other prophetic signs. God's big picture of signs is an interconnected web. It is through these connections between related prophetic signs that God is telling very important stories that are revealing very important knowledge. For example, it is through God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections that He is revealing the way in which Barack Obama will become the president again, which is through the death of Vice President Kamala Harris in a plane crash. For many years, God has been painting this particular picture through His prophetic signs, and along the way He has been developing numerous trails of connected signs that are leading to the precise date that Harris is predicted to die in a plane crash. Here is a diagram that illustrates one such example among countless examples. As we can see here, God has demonstrated a number of trails of signs that led to August 24th, 2023. It was known ahead of time that there would be a prophetic sign related to the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash on August 24th. And then on this day, Vladimir Putin was the first public official to confirm that the Russian general and leader of the Wagner Group that attempted a coup of Vladimir Putin died in a plane crash, which hints at the soft coup that has been unfolding in America in recent years. In retrospect, it could have been easily predicted that the Russian general of the Wagner Group would die in a plane crash on August 24th because it was known that August 24th is 54 days before October 17th, which was another date God was pointing to ahead of time. This is why on August 24th, Trump, God's trumpet, had in 5 months been arrested for the 4th time in the 4th state. It also hinted at the number 54. God has been using in His signs the theme of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, the first black regiment to fight in the Civil War, who were known for fighting valiantly at Fort Wagner. As we can see in this diagram, the trail of signs continues on from August 24th to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on February 24th. This is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. And this theme of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment is an example of a story that God is telling that is extremely important. Actually, February 24th ended up being another step in the trail of signs regarding the prediction for Kamala Harris's death in a plane crash that is leading to the date of her predicted crash in the same plane as Gavin Newsom, and their crash is predicted to be on August 2nd, 2028. The same is true for the prediction that Israel will bomb Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities. In this case, August 26th, 2023 was an extremely important step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date that Israel is predicted to bomb Iran on April 26th, 2025. God developed many prophetic trails of signs that led to August 26th, 2023. The analysis in this video explains how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections pointed to the date August 26th, 2023. and why it was believed that this would be the predicted date that Israel would bomb Iran's nuclear, energy, and weapons facilities. Since the time of the original production of this video, God's signs have revealed more knowledge, and instead of bombing Iran on August 26th, August 26th ended up being an important step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date that Israel will bomb Iran. It is now predicted that Israel will bomb Iran's nuclear, energy, and weapons facilities on April 26th, 2025, exactly 9 plus 11 months after the step in the trail of signs that God was pointing to in advance, August 26th, 2023. In a minute, I will explain how it is relevant, but on August 26th, 2023, the famous host of the game show The Price is Right, Bob Barker, died at the age of 99, and 99 is 9 times 11. August 26th was the day that the host of the TV game show The Price is Right, Bob Barker, died at the age of 99, 9 days before September 4th. September 4th was the day of the prophetic Burning Man sign, the amazing details of which are explained in the must-watch Burning Man prophecy video. Every year at the end of the Burning Man festival, 70,000 quote-unquote burners leave en masse in what is called the Exodus. This year, the Exodus was a muddy disaster when the Playa Desert sand turned to mud due to unprecedented rain. The quote-unquote burners were trapped for days before they were finally allowed to begin the Exodus in the afternoon on Monday, a full day after most people typically leave the desert playa on the Sunday. The disastrous Burning Man Exodus is symbolism for an evacuation, and it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant and cause an evacuation in southwest Iran. The prophetic Burning Man Exodus on September 4th, that was the result of sand turning to mud, was 9 days after Bob Barker died at the age of 99 on August 26th, and Barker is famous for his fight scene in a movie with Jewish comedian Adam Sandler, in which Sandler is thrown into water and is soaking wet, which hints at the sand turning to mud at Burning Man 9 days after Sandler's tribute tweet to Barker on the day he died at the age of 99. Barker rhymes with Bushehr, and the fight between Barker and the Jewish comedian hints at the fight between the Jewish nation Israel and Iran when Israel will bomb Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant. Barker hosted the TV game show The Price is Right for a record 35 years, and Persia was renamed Iran in 1935. Roman, Greek, and Hebrew letters are also numbers, and as such, names and words can be converted into a numeric value. This is called gematria. The name Bob Barker in English gematria is equal to 444, and on the day that the host of The Price is Right died, news broke that the U.S. Marines are buying, for the right price, 44 of Israel's Iron Dome launchers. The name Bob Barker is equal to 444, and he died on the day that 44 of Israel's Iron Dome launchers were sold to the U.S. for the right price, and this date, August 26th, 2023, is exactly 4 times 4 plus 4 months before it is predicted that Israel and the U.S. will bomb Iran. To confirm his prophetic signs, patterns, and connections, God frequently pairs the numbers 9, 23, and 44 together, as the number 9 is the most important number in God's end times warning signs, as from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. The number 23 is the 9th prime number, and 2 divided by 3 equals 0.666, the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. This is why the Antichrist, the 44th president, became the president in 2009 and was the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school. The name Bob Barker in Gematria equals 444, and he died at the age of 99, and on the same day as the death of the host of the TV show The Price is Right, it was also reported that the U.S. Marines are buying for the right price 44 of Israel's Iron Dome launchers. Again, this is how God confirms his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. He pairs the numbers 9 and 44 together, which serves as a second witness confirmation, which the Bible says is required. 99 days after Bob Barker died at the age of 99, and the sale of 44 of Israel's Iron Dome launchers was the day that Iranian-backed Houthis launched missiles at an Israel-associated commercial ship named Number 9. This was on December 3rd, the same day that it was reported that Israel had moved beyond Gaza City and was for the first time operating its ground forces across the entire Gaza Strip region with its 2.3 million people population. 2.3 million people hints at 23, and this pairs with the number 9 ship on this same day. And this number 23 that is contained in the 2.3 million population pairs with the exact 99 days to the date that Bob Barker died at the age of 99, a pairing of 9 and 23. Again, to confirm his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, God pairs the numbers 9, 23, and 44 together, and from the day of the death at the age of 99 of the host of The Price is Right, Bob Barker, whose name hints at the Bashur nuclear power plant, and who died on the same day that 44 of Israel's Iron Dome launchers were sold for the right price. It is exactly 2 times 3 months to the relevant signs that occurred on February 26th, 2024, and then from February 26th, it is exactly 2 plus 3 months to the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran's Bashur nuclear power plant on July 26th, 2024. 2 times 3 months and 2 plus 3 months pair with the 44 Iron Dome launchers and Barker's death at the age of 99. And this confirms the signs and connections. The relevant signs that occurred on February 26th, that were expected in advance of February 26th, were the Israeli Air Force announcement that it is creating a new Iran department. As well, on February 26th, the Palestinian Prime Minister announced his resignation. It is widely believed that his resignation is to make way for a new Palestinian government leading to a Palestinian state. There are 531 days in a prophetic blood moon lunar eclipse tetrad, and tetrads are associated with the restoration of the nation of Israel. Also, on February 26th, a member of the U.S. Air Force 531st Intelligence Support Squadron set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., in protest of the Israel-Gaza war. The fire is symbolic of Damascus being consumed in fire when Israel drops a nuclear bomb on it. Additionally, and perhaps most importantly, on February 26th, 2024, Jacob Rothschild, 4th Baron Rothschild, died. His great-uncle was Walter Rothschild, 2nd Baron Rothschild, to whom the U.S. government addressed the Balfour Declaration that declared that Palestine be a homeland for the Jewish people. thus paving the way for Jews to emigrate to Israel. The date February 26th hints at H226 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which is the word that means prophetic sign. The Rothschild family has a long history of being involved in Zionism and the restoration of Israel. We were expecting a prophetic sign on February 26th, and the date itself hints at prophetic sign, and we expected this prophetic sign to involve Israel, and this death of Jacob Rothschild, 4th Baron Rothschild, pointed to Walter Rothschild, 2nd Baron Rothschild. The 4th and 2nd Barons also hint at the number 42, and in Bible prophecy, the number 42 is symbolic of the period of the Antichrist, who will lead the world in attempting to divide Israel, God's land, which is why the Palestinian Prime Minister resigned on the same day that Jacob Rothschild died. And in the Bible, Jacob was renamed Israel. July 26th, 2024 ended up being another step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran. Prior to July 26th, it was recognized that it would be a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date that Israel will bomb Iran. This event will not only be about Israel, but it is about the world ganging up on Israel in order to attempt to divide God's land. July 26th in 2024 was exactly 235 months after the Indonesia tsunami, or rather the Indian Ocean tsunami. 235 is the 77th semi-prime number, a number only divisible by two other prime numbers, the 77th prime number, and the tsunami on December 26th, 2004 was exactly 7 times 7 months before the Obama inauguration eclipse, which was 2 times 3 days after the inauguration of the basketball president who wore jersey 23 in high school. When I refer to what I mean by the Obama inauguration eclipse is that 6 days after his inauguration, there was a total solar eclipse that only went over Indonesia and no other country. And Barack Obama, the 44th president, grew up in Indonesia for 4 years. Also, the eclipse went over Jakarta, Indonesia, which is where the 44th president grew up for 4 years. This connection to the Indian Ocean tsunami is extremely important, but I'm actually just taking this as a clip from another write-up, and this will have to be explained in another video. God uses firsts for his signs. The international sign we were expecting on July 26, 2024, regarding Israel and the world was the first ever Olympics opening ceremony outside of a stadium. The ceremony instead was held on the river that runs through Paris. The name of the river, Seine, hints at sin. Okay, I'll say that again. Seine hints at sin. This Olympics parade on the river is astounding because the day of the parade, July 26th, that's a typo, 2024, connects prophetically to the date of the peak of the once in 200 years flooding in downtown Paris from the Seine River. And that flooding included the flooding of the famous art museum, the Louvre. The peak of the flooding was June 3rd, 2016, the same date that world leaders met in France for the Middle East Peace Initiative conference to discuss what to do about Israel without Israel in attendance and with Israel officially condemning the talks. Okay? The same day of the peak of the flooding, the once in 200 disaster flooding, once in 200 years disastrous flooding, was the same day that the world leaders met in Paris, France for this blasphemous Antichrist talks without Israel, and Israel officially condemning the talks. It was a prophetic sign that pointed to God's promise to Abraham in Genesis 12:3 regarding his descendants and the nation of Israel. And the prior verse speaks of the future nation. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all the people on earth will be blessed through you. Those nations that curse Israel will be cursed, and that was the relevance of the peak of the once in 200 years destructive flooding in Paris on the same day as the talks. The talks regarding what to do about Israel without Israel in attendance and officially condemning the talks. Muhammad Ali was a Muslim who was staunchly anti-Israel, and he was known for famous boxing matches that are associated with various locations around the world. I should say around the world. The number 1,656 is symbolic of the flood in the Bible, as the flood began 1,656 years after Adam. Ali died on the same day as the peak of the river flooding in downtown Paris. That was on the day of the world leaders' anti-Israel talks. Ali died on 6/3, which hints at 3 6s, which is the number that symbolizes the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. This was in 2016. That hints at 216, which is 6 times 6 times 6, and the Antichrist was born on the 216th day of the calendar year. And this talks and Ali's death was exactly 1,000, and the talks were again on the day of the flooding. And again, this number is associated with the flood. This flooding and talks sign and Ali's death was exactly 1,656 days before the first day that an American took the mark of the Antichrist on December 14th, 2020. Ali was also known for his conscientious objection to fighting in the Vietnam War. And God's purpose for the mark of the Antichrist is to test the faith of quote-unquote Christians who must conscientiously object to the mark of the Antichrist. The date of the opening ceremony in Paris, July 26th, hints at 726, and G726 in Strong's Greek Concordance, which is the word rapture, lowercase r. The number 714 hints at Revelation 7:14, the verse that symbolizes God's faithful who will be rescued and evacuated from the persecution from the Antichrist and the mark of the Antichrist, which is the rapture. The rapture is this event in Bible prophecy when God's faithful will be evacuated, rescued from the coming severe persecution from the Antichrist. Okay, so again, this date in itself hints at the rapture because of the date 726, hinting at G726, the word for rapture. And the number 714 also is symbolic of this rapture in Revelation 7:14. Okay, and God's faithful who will be rescued and evacuated from the persecution from the Antichrist and the mark of the Antichrist. All right, I'm just going to interject into this paragraph some further explanation because it wasn't adequately explained here. So the rapture is this most preposterous idea in Christianity in which God's true faithful will not go through the severe persecution from the Antichrist who will use the mark of the Antichrist. And this is also symbolized in the book of Genesis with the account of the flood. Now, on this date, 726, which in itself, as I just explained, hints at the rapture because of the 726th word in the Greek concordance. On this date was the parade of boats down the river Seine in Paris, and God uses firsts for signs. This was the first ever opening ceremony of the Olympics, world symbolism, as in worldwide Antichrist symbolism. And these boats going down the river are symbolic of the ark and the flood and the rescue of Noah and his family. Because the rescue of Noah and his family in the ark is symbolic of the coming rapture and the rescue of God's faithful, as Noah was. Now I'm about to explain the connection between the prophetic flooding in Paris that I just explained and the date of the opening ceremony of the Olympics in Paris. And I'm going to explain how it hints at the primary verse in the Bible that symbolizes the rapture, Revelation 7:14. We have a 71,400 hours connection here. So I'm just going to explain that now. The date of the peak of the flooding from the river in Paris, June 3rd, 2016, was 71,400 hours before the Paris Olympics opening ceremony on the river in Paris. The symbolic moment of Ali's conscientious objection to the Vietnam War was the meeting between Ali, 10 other celebrity athletes, and one politician. They met for the Cleveland Summit. Okay, so anyway, if you didn't catch that, I didn't reinforce it, emphasize it. This 71,400 hours is a hint at the verse in Revelation that symbolizes the rapture. Okay, because it's hinting at Revelation 7:14. And again, this 71,400 hours connects the date that symbolizes the rapture with these two events involving the river in Paris, the flooding and Ali's death on the day of the talks in Paris, and Ali was anti-Israel, and the day of the Paris Olympics on the river, the parade on the river, which involved the world. And again, the parade on the river was about boats. And again, we are talking about this in context of the flooding on that same river 71,400 hours earlier, which therefore hints at the flooding and the rescue and rapture, if you will, of Noah and his family in the ark, the boat. Furthermore, I also explained how the death of Muhammad Ali was 1,656 days before the mark of the Antichrist, the first time it was taken. And Muhammad Ali is symbolic of conscientious objection. That's the main thing, arguably, that Ali is known for, was how he was stripped of his title and was banned from boxing for years because he refused to fight in the Vietnam War due to his conscientious objection with the government. And that's hinting at the coming necessity for quote-unquote Christians to conscientiously object to the government's mandate regarding the thing, the mark of the Antichrist. And the 1,656 days in between the death of Muhammad Ali and the mark of the Antichrist on December 14th, 2020 is again relevant because the flood began 1,656 years after Adam in the chronology of the Bible, which is an allegory. And one more thing to add to this, because it all is full circle. All of the signs overlap, and now I'm delving into other themes that I didn't want to, or not the purpose of this video, but it's hard to define a purpose for a video because all of God's signs are interconnected and all of the themes overlap. And to explain something, you have to explain these other things to back it up. And that's what I'm doing right now. But one other thing to add is that the flood in Genesis chapter 7 began as a result of humanity corrupting its chromosomes. I'm going to use that word because of the filters. Humanity's chromosomes were corrupted in Genesis chapter 6, and that's why the necessity for God to cleanse the earth and have the flood. Well, that's exactly what the mark of the Antichrist does. The thing that people took beginning on December 14th, 2020, changes a person's chromosomes. Okay, so the symbol, and so anyway, Ali's conscientious objection to the Vietnam War is symbolized by this Cleveland summit. One story of the Olympic opening ceremony on the river was how LeBron James was the U.S. flag bearer. James is famous for playing for Cleveland, and James's story, and was furthermore born in Cleveland. And James's story with Cleveland was a major prophetic sign that identified the basketball president as the Antichrist. That's another story. Actually, this James story here and how he identifies Barack Obama as the Antichrist needs to be explained. Sorry to go off onto another little tangent here, just for another minute. But LeBron James is known, like I said, for playing his career in Cleveland before making his decision to leave Cleveland. And he's from Cleveland, and so the hometown fans of Cleveland really hated LeBron James. They felt as if he betrayed their city, etc., for not sticking around to win a championship for Cleveland, which at the time had been suffering what is known in sports as the Cleveland sports curse. There are these episodes in Cleveland's history which it is believed there is a curse preventing them from winning a championship. They've had a long drought in all of their franchises, their major league sports teams, until LeBron James. And that's, again, hinting at the curse of the Antichrist, because LeBron James returned to Cleveland after playing for Miami and winning the championship there in order to win the championship for Cleveland, which he then did. In 2016, incidentally, the same month as the prophetic flooding in Paris. No kidding, I didn't even realize that until just now. It was the same month. And in 2016, incidentally, hints at 216, which is 6 times 6 times 6. And also, the Antichrist Obama was born on the 216th day of the calendar year, and the name Barack in English gematria equals 216. Well, so LeBron James returned after a hiatus. He left Cleveland and then came back. That's a hint at how Barack Obama will have left the White House and will return to the White House as the president again, as the Antichrist. That's what is going to happen. He will become the president after the election in 2028. Michelle Obama will be the president, he'll be the vice president, and then at some point she'll step down and he'll become the president. Okay, and so that's what's hinted at with LeBron James. Now, LeBron James wears jersey number 23, the same jersey number that Barack Obama, the basketball president, wore in high school. And that's the same with also Michael Jordan, the GOAT, greatest of all time. In fact, there is a debate among basketball fans as to who is the GOAT, Michael Jordan or LeBron James. They both wore number 23. This hints at the GOAT Antichrist, Barack Obama, who wore number 23. And likewise, Michael Jordan also had a hiatus of 1 year. He retired for 1 year and then returned. After winning 3 championships, he returned after a year of retirement and then won another 3 championships. So you have an even amount on each side, a total of 6 championships. In Chicago, Barack Obama is from Chicago. That's the reason for all of that. Now, Michael Jordan wore number 9 for the Olympic, speaking of LeBron James being the flag bearer for the Olympics team in this Olympics just passed. Michael Jordan was a star in the famous Olympic Dream Team, in which he wore jersey number 9. And like I said earlier, God pairs 9 and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections, as the basketball president who wore 23 was inaugurated in 2009. And when Michael Jordan wore number 9, his team outscored their opponents in the Olympics by an average of 44 points. That's a pairing of 9, 23, and 44. The basketball president who wore 23 was the 44th president inaugurated in 2009. Now, LeBron James, who wore 23, was the flag bearer on this July 26th date that God was pointing to in advance regarding Israel and the bombing of Iran. And that's why from the day that number 23, LeBron James was the flag bearer on this prophetic parade down the river in Paris, it is exactly 9 months to the date it is predicted that Israel and the U.S. will bomb Iran on April 26th, 2025. That's exactly 9 months after player number 23 was the flag bearer in this prophetic sign here. So there you have the connection there. I've jumped ahead, but there's more to explain regarding this, these signs on July 26th, 2024. And I'll just get through that and then get into the rest of this video. Therefore, this 71,400 hours connection is confirmed through the Cleveland Summit, connecting to the famous player for Cleveland. Because again, this 71,400 hours connects the day that Muhammad Ali died, and he's known for the Cleveland Summit, and it connects to the player for Cleveland being the flag bearer on the Paris River, and again, Muhammad Ali died on the day of the Paris River flooding sign. In regards to the theme of the world in these signs, the World Trade Center towers collapsed on 9/11, 666 days before NASA launched its Opportunity probe to Mars, which was symbolism for the opportunity to repent after the 9/11 warning of judgment from God. In turn, Opportunity's launch, that's the opportunity for America to repent. In turn, Opportunity's launch on July 8th, 2003 was exactly 7 years, and this is symbolic of the period of the end and the Antichrist in Daniel chapter 9, before LeBron James's famous TV show special named The Decision, in which he announced his decision to leave Cleveland. In return, the decision, as in decision to not repent after the opportunity to repent, was exactly 9, and the number 9 is the most important number in God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel as from the Bible. It symbolizes God's judgment. This decision show was exactly 9 years before the prophetic flooding in Washington, D.C., the capital of the nation, at the Washington Monument, White House, and Pentagon. The flooding flooded the basement where the White House press corps has their offices, which was a sign against the press, the anti-conservative, anti-Trump press. And the flooding in the Pentagon was symbolic of many things. LeBron wears number 23, which pairs with this 9 years connection to point to Obama, because Obama also wore 23 in high school in basketball and was inaugurated in 2009. Furthermore, the mark of the Antichrist is the inverse of it is described in the book of Ezekiel chapter 9, and the mark of the Antichrist changes a person's 23 chromosomes. I should say 23 pairs of chromosomes. One more thing one finer detail to elaborate here. The Decision show was symbolic of not so much, well, it was, but America's decision to not repent, but also God's decision, because America had the opportunity, and now it's God's decision as a result of America not repenting to execute his promised judgment, which is the reason for the 9 years exact connection, because the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. And so that's why we have the exact 9 years to the flooding in the capital of the nation, which is symbolic of America. Okay, and that again is relevant too, because God pairs 23 and 9, that confirms the signs and connections. Again, I explained that. So now this goes off into so much more. The thing about explaining God's big picture of signs is that it is an interconnected web, and when you try to pull one or explain one part of the web, you end up pulling the entire web. And so I'll cut it off here. We're not going to go elaborate any further. We know what I should also say, given we've been talking about the mark of the Antichrist here. July 8th, 2019, the date of this prophetic flooding, that was exactly 9 years after the Decision TV episode. July 8th, 2019 was exactly 60 plus 60 plus 60 years after the birth of John D. Rockefeller, who is the pioneer of the modern healthcare industry and also specifically the things that are the mark of the Antichrist. These things, John D. Rockefeller and his institute pioneered. And that's why God uses this. Also, this exact 60 plus 60 plus 60 years after the birth of Rockefeller is the equivalent of 2,160 months, which hints at 216, which again is 6 times 6 times 6. And Barack Obama, again, was born on the 216th day of the year, and his name equals 216 in Gematria. Barker is known for his fight scene with the soaking wet Jewish comedian Adam Sandler, and Barker died at the age of 99, 9 days before the sand became wet and turned to mud during the Exodus evacuation in the desert at Burning Man, which is in turn 90 days before the Iranian-backed Houthis launched missiles at the Israeli number 9 ship on the same day that Israel began operating across the entirety of Gaza with its 2.3 million people. In simple English gematria, the name Iran is equal to 42, and the name Hamas is also equal to 42. 42 days after Barker died, and it was reported that the U.S. Marines are buying Israel's Iron Dome launchers, was the day that Israel's Iron Dome system was overwhelmed by Hamas rockets, at the same time that Hamas terrorists broke through the security fence and massacred people at a music festival in the Israeli desert, which is what was hinted at with the muddy disaster and Exodus evacuation in the desert at the Burning Man festival. The Exodus evacuation at Burning Man finally began at 2 p.m., 1400 military time on the Monday, and it was 1400 Israelis that Hamas killed, most of whom were evacuating the music festival in the Israeli desert. Persia was renamed Iran in 1935. Bob Barker hosted the TV show The Price is Right for a record 35 years, and he is famous for his fight scene with Jewish comedian Adam Sandler, in which Sandler gets wet in a pool of water. And the 35th chapter of the book of Isaiah in the Bible is a prophecy about the parched land of the desert becoming a pool of water, and about a road that God's ransomed will travel on called Highway of Holiness. The burners in their exodus out of the parched land that had been turned to pools of water traveled down what is called Gate Road. And in the Bible, judgment on a people symbolically begins at the gate. Jesus said he is the gate, and the only way to evacuate and escape the coming destruction and death is through Jesus. In Hebrew gematria, the name Iran and the name Hamas are both equal to 130. In the Bible, ancient Persia is associated with the number 13, as Haman, a leader, a general in Persia, attempted to persecute the Jews and exterminate the Jews on the 13th days of the month. This is why it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran 1 year and 3 months and 13 days after these signs on August 26th, 2023. 1 year, 3 months, and 13 days hints at 2 13s, and again, Haman, a type for the Antichrist in the Bible, persecuted the Jews on the 13th days of the month. Furthermore, there are 2 antichrists who will lead the world in ganging up on Israel that are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. All right, so what I just mentioned about this connection of 1 year, 3 months, and 13 days, which hints at 13 and therefore Iran, Persia, to this December 17th, 2024 date, this was recorded, what I just mentioned was recorded prior to this date, and this date also ended up being another step in the trail of signs. This was the day that Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, became the first prime minister to stand on top of Mount Hermon. And God uses firsts for signs. So Mount Hermon was taken when the Assyrian regime, Assad, fell, and Israel annexed further territory along its border in the Golan Heights and the biblical Mount Hermon. And so that's very strategic, but also very symbolic. And the fall of the Assad regime is also symbolic of the of war in Iran. This was the climax of the Syrian civil war, this fall of the Assad regime. And also it occurred on the day of a prophetic earthquake in Syria, same day as Netanyahu ascended the Mount Hermon. Now, the earthquake was in Tartus, and let's see. Tartus hints at Tartarus in Greek mythology. The deep abyss that is used as a dungeon of torment and suffering for the wicked and as the prison for the Titans. That's what Tartarus is in Greek mythology. Okay, now, as I wrote here in this email that was written back in December, this was a day that was known to be associated with the day prior to it. God was pointing to both of these dates with the same theme, and sure enough, that's exactly what transpired, because the day before was the death. No. On the 17th, it was the death of the general, speaking of Persian generals from the Bible, Haman, who persecuted the Jews on the 13th days of the month. Igor Kirillov, the Russian general, was killed in a bomb. And we are talking about the bombing of Iran. Now, the day before, let's just read what I wrote. So on December 16th, Ukraine's SBU intelligence agency named Russian General Igor Kirillov the head of Russia's Army's radiation, chemical, and biological protection troops in a criminal case for the quote-unquote mass use of prohibited chemical weapons on the eastern and southern fronts of Ukraine. It cited, quote, more than 4,800 cases of the enemy using chemical munitions, unquote, on Ukrainian territory since the start of the full-scale Russian invasion in February, 2022. Kirillov was internationally known for repeating that Ukraine was seeking to develop a dirty bomb. He alleged that 2 organizations in Ukraine had specific instructions to create a so-called dirty bomb. This work is in the final stages, he said. He's this guy associated with bombs. That's enough for this video here. That's all you need to know. He's associated with bombs. He died on this day that we were predicting a bomb sign, which was prior to it, the day it was predicted that Israel would bomb Iran, but also this was in conjunction with the prediction that bombs will be used in New York City. So the themes, the trails of signs for these two things, the bombs in New York City and the bombing of Iran, overlapped on December 16th and 17th, 2024. And now I've just explained what happened. So on the 17th, we had the bomb symbolism because it was a bomb that killed this general that was known for talking about bombs, as I just explained. And also it was the symbolic date for Israel because Israel expanded its territory. That's huge prophetically because it's all about the restoration of Israel. And so Israel's territory expanded. The prime minister of Israel went on top of Mount Hermon, a big deal in terms of prophetic significance. And so now, as I've just explained, This date, August 26, 2023, was 1 year, 3 months, and 13 days, which hints at Iran. Okay, as I explained, to this date here. It turns out that this date right here, December 17th, 2024, that I've just explained and confirmed for you now that is or was a step in the trail of signs, this date here is 130 days exactly to the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran. And again, 13 symbolizes Iran. That's astounding beyond words. Again, we have 1 year, 3 months, and 13 days, followed by 130 days. And again, as I mentioned earlier, Iran is equal to 130 in gematria. That's amazing. That's amazing beyond words. Okay. It was known since January that God was pointing to May 17th and May 20th regarding Israel bombing Iran and Damascus, Syria. And as will be explained in these videos, on May 17th, we received the prophetic sign that was the vandalized tomb of Joseph in the northern West Bank territory. And on May 20th was the G7 summit in Hiroshima, Japan, the location that the first nuclear bomb was used in an act of war. And on May 20th was the surprise visit to the G7 summit in Hiroshima of the first Jewish president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, who at the beginning of the war with Russia had just turned 44 years old when Ukraine was made up of 44 million people. God is using Vladimir Zelensky as symbolism for the Antichrist, who is the 44th president. As described in Bible prophecy, the Jews in Jerusalem will flee Judea because of the 44th president Antichrist, similar to how there was an exodus of people from the nation that was 44 million, led by the first Jewish president at the age of 44. The surprise visit of the first Jewish president of Ukraine to the G7 summit at the location where the first nuclear bomb was dropped was 4 times 4 days after the 44-year-old leader of the 44 million nation made a surprise visit to the International Criminal Court, which was set up for the purpose of conducting court trials regarding war crimes. And after Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria, the world, led by the 44th president, will gang up on Israel and accuse it of war crimes. And as will be explained in these videos, Damascus, Syria is symbolized by the number 444. It is predicted that Israel will bomb, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities on August 26, 2023. This will be exactly 4 times 4 months after April 26, 2022. And although it isn't completely related to the subject of this video, on April 26, 2022, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris tweeted and announced that she had the CVD disease 44 days after the 44th president tweeted and announced that he had the CVD disease. The 44th president will become the president again through the predicted death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash on October 17, 2023. After this introduction to this video, the rest of this video will be an explanation for how God's signs, patterns, and connections pointed to the date April 26th in relation to the day that Israel will bomb, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities. It was known since 2021 that God was pointing to April 26th, and prior to April 26th, it was believed that this would be the date that Israel would bomb Iran. Instead, however, on this day, a big news story regarded the White House's statement that Iran's breakout time has been reduced from a year to weeks. The White House stated that it was very concerned about this. The breakout time refers to the amount of time it would take Iran to enrich enough uranium for a nuclear bomb. This was a new development regarding Iran's nuclear program, and it coincidentally occurred on April 26th, the date that was known ahead of time since 2021. This statement from the White House came after Secretary of State Antony Blinken's testimony in a U.S. Senate hearing earlier in this day. He told Senate Foreign Relations Chairman Senator Bob Menendez that Iran's breakout time had been reduced from a year to weeks. This emphasis on weeks was a sign that God gave us that indicated that the day that Israel will nuke Iran is weeks away. But just how many weeks is the question. In the video titled Prediction Chernobyl Disaster equals Israel will nuke Iran on August 26th, it is explained the prophetic signs that occurred on April 26th, 2022, as well as many other prophetic signs in a trail of signs that is ultimately leading to August 26th, 2023. Therefore, arguably, this Chernobyl disaster prediction video is the most important video regarding these predictions regarding Israel bombing Iran and Damascus, Syria. Make sure you watch the prediction Chernobyl disaster video. Either pause this video here and come back to it, or watch the Chernobyl disaster video after watching this video. I will leave a link to the prediction Chernobyl disaster video in the description box below this video. From these prophetic signs on April 26th, these prophetic signs that relate to Israel and its conflict with Iran, these signs on April 26th are 390 days before May 20th, 2023. And the number of 390 days is extremely prophetic. As for one thing, it comes from the extremely prophetic prophecy in the book of Ezekiel in chapter 4, which regards God's timing regarding the nation of Israel. But also, the number 390 symbolizes the return of God, the return of Lord Jesus Christ to Jerusalem in Israel. God has clearly and repeatedly demonstrated this in his big picture of prophetic signs. And the reason why this is the case is that the 390th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word for return. The Apostle James used this word when he quoted Amos 9:11 from the Old Testament, which regards the Lord's return to rebuild his temple in Jerusalem. And as was stated, the bombing of Damascus will lead to the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. And so it is astounding that we have this 390 days connection from the prophetic signs on April 26th to May 20th, the date it was predicted that Israel would nuke Damascus, Syria, but turned out to be two sets of 49 days. Which hints at Jeremiah 49, before it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran on August 26th. As well, one of the many reasons that May 20th was known ahead of time is that it is 4 times 4 days after May 4th, the date that the 44-year-old leader of the 44 million people nation made a surprise visit to the International Criminal Court. May 4th, 2023 was also a date that it was known ahead of time that God was pointing to. The International Criminal Court was set up for the purpose of conducting court trials for war crimes, and the reason why God pointed ahead of time to May 4th and the visit to the International Criminal Court of the 44-year-old leader of the nation of 44 million people is because after Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria, the world will condemn Israel for war crimes, and the world will be led by the Antichrist, the 44th president. And so from this surprise visit of the 44-year-old of the 44 million people nation to the International Criminal Court, it is 4 times 4 days to the date that the 44-year-old of the 44 million nation will make a surprise visit to the G7 summit in Hiroshima, the location in which the first nuclear bomb was used in an act of war. The bombing of Iran will lead to the nuking of Damascus, Syria, and as I will explain, Damascus is symbolized by the number 444. All right, the first thing to say just at the beginning here, This video was made, like I was saying before, April 26th, 2022, and today is July 22nd, 2023. Anyway, I just wanted to get out of the way here first. At this date here, this very important date that I will be describing in this video, the day of the explosions at the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran, this prophetic event and date. This date here is 1,150 days, 1,150 days before August 26th, 2023, the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, including the Natanz facility. The reason why 1,150 days is extremely prophetic is because this number of days is mentioned in the prophecy in Daniel chapter 8 regarding the time of the end, quote unquote, and the Antichrist in Jerusalem. And this period of days regards the Temple Mount, the sacrifices that are resumed on the Temple Mount, and they are I can't explain the prophecy in detail. It's about much more. It's about Alexander the Great and the prophetic type foreshadow of the Antichrist, Antiochus Epiphanes, who discontinued sacrifices on the Temple Mount in the 3rd century BC, and it was for 1,150 days. In other words, this 1,150 days regards the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and as I am explaining in these videos, the bombing of Iran, which will lead to the nuking of Damascus, Syria, will lead to the Jews retaking completely the Temple Mount and resuming temple sacrifices. And so that's why it is astounding that this date here, July 2nd, 2020, connects with exactly 1,150 days to the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran on August 26th, 2023. All right, before we begin with the information in this video that was recorded before April 26th, 2022, I just want to say that this date here, this day that Israel attacked the Natanz facility in Iran, July 2nd, 2020, which I will explain more in this video, that date is exactly 150 weeks to May 17th, 2023, the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran. This is a huge confirmation for this prediction. 150 is the number in the account of Noah's flood. It's the duration of the flood judgment by God on the world. But also 150 weeks is 25,200 hours. 25,200 hints at 2,520, which is the end times number in Bible prophecy. It is a number that God uses in his big picture of signs. And so that's why this connection is astounding. And so that's that. Let's continue with this video. All right, on Wikipedia, there is a page titled 2020 Iran Explosions. This is a page dedicated to this phenomenon that happened in 2020, this series of explosions, and I'll just read the first couple of paragraphs. The 2020 Iran explosions were a series of explosions in Iran with undetermined causes of origin. First reported on June 26, 2020, the explosions' locations included an advanced centrifuge assembly facility, alleged missile sites, petrochemical centers, power plants, and medical clinics. The government has denied reports of explosions in its missile sites while acknowledging damage to its largest nuclear enrichment facility in Natanz. Some Western and Iranian officials stated the cause of explosions to be Israeli cyber attacks and covert U.S. and Israeli strikes. The government vowed to retaliate if sabotage was confirmed in its Natanz nuclear facility. There are a lot more details to what was happening in 2020 regarding these explosions, but let's just dive right into the first one and begin explaining this extremely profound diagram you were looking at. And this would be the explosion in Tehran. This explosion occurred 30 kilometers southeast of the capital, Tehran, in a military complex named Parchin. And within the same hour, a massive power outage occurred in another city called Shiraz, which housed major military facilities. Officials declared the explosion a gas storage accident and said that an explosion had hit the power station in Shiraz, causing the blackout. A Western analyst stated that the explosion in Parchin had occurred in a missile storage facility with hidden nuclear detonation technology work. A Western analyst claimed the explosion in Parchin was caused by an Israeli cyber attack, while a senior Iranian commander said he could not comment whether the explosion was a cyber attack until there was a conclusion on the issue. Citing an unnamed senior source, the Kuwaiti newspaper Al Jarida reported that the facility was destroyed in an airstrike by Israeli F-35 stealth fighter jets. On June 30th, 2020, American and Israeli officials speaking to the New York Times said they had nothing to do with the explosion in Parchin. In any case, this was the first of the series of explosions in Tehran, and it was a major prophetic sign, as we will see. And this explosion in Iran and near the capital, Tehran, is also pointing to the day that Israel will use a nuclear bomb on Iran and bomb their clandestine nuclear weapons program. So this day, June 26, 2020, was exactly 44 weeks before the biggest civil disaster in modern Israel history, when in a stampede, also called a crush event, killed 44 people. The initial report was 44 deaths. The next day it was updated to 45 deaths. But the prophetic significance is in the first report of 44 deaths. Also 45 is relevant and prophetic because the 44th president, God is demonstrating through his signs, and it is relevant to the signs, will skip the 45th presidency and become president again. That's the reason for the number 45 here and in other signs in his big picture of signs. Okay, and so that day was, this 44 deaths was in turn 44 days. And this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes this true and not a product of one's imagination, and what makes it different and unique from all other things on the internet. And so we have, again, a 40 weeks connection exactly to the 44 deaths, followed by another 44 days connection to this date, which was June 13th in the Gregorian calendar, but in the Hebrew calendar, it was the date 4-4, which is a second witness to the 44 days connection, which in turn, of course, is a second witness to the 44 deaths prophetic sign. And by the way, prior to this date, April 30th, 2021, I had predicted that Israel would bomb Iran with the nuclear bomb and bomb their nuclear weapons program in Iran because of the signs that were pointing to this date ahead of time. It turned out to be just another step, or not just, but another step along the way to the eventual day, to the day that Israel will bomb Iran with a nuclear bomb. And so, in other words, I predicted this crush event because this was a major event in Israel, and I had been predicting such a major event involving Israel. Okay, so anyway, on this date 4-4, and I also predicted this ahead of time, that there would be something major and prophetic regarding Israel. I predicted it many weeks ahead of time. In fact, right after this event of the 44 deaths, because this was the date 4-4 in the Hebrew calendar, and it connected with 44 days to the 44 deaths, so this was pretty clear. And it turned out that this was the day that Netanyahu lost his power. after 12 years in office. And God has used Netanyahu in other prophetic signs. This is prophetically relevant. Now, Netanyahu was in office for 12 years, and that's part of the confirmation and the hinting at this, which is 144, which is 12 times 12. Now, this day, in turn, was exactly 9 months, okay? And the reason why that's prophetic is because, first of all, the number 9 is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections of end times judgment warning signs, because from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes judgment. And also, when asked by his disciples for the signs to look for of his return, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains. And the average human gestation period is 9 months. And so 9 months connections also symbolize the end times judgment and judgment, tribulation period. And so that's the reason for this exact 9 months connection here to this date here, which was March 13th, 2022, another date that had been predicted well in advance. In fact, almost a year in advance. It was July or June in 2021 that I predicted that there would be a major explosion involving the United States on this day. And as I will explain, that in fact occurred. So this date was known almost a year in advance, but it turned out that this day, one of the prophetic signs was the announcement of Tom Brady, the GOAT, greatest of all time, of football. GOAT is Antichrist symbolism. The GOAT tweeted, through his tweet, he announced that he would return for a 23rd season. And the specific number 23rd was mentioned in his tweet. Now, God uses the number 23 to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, but he also pairs the numbers 23 and 9 together to confirm the signs and connections and to reveal the identity of the Antichrist. And so I'll just take a couple of minutes here to briefly explain this. God uses the number 23 to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. In the Old Testament in the Bible, it is described how 2 goats were used on the Day of Atonement in the ritual on the Temple Mount. In Bible prophecy, there are 2 antichrists, and in Bible prophecy, it is said that the Antichrist will rule the Temple Mount during the end times period. And the Antichrist will be vanquished from the Temple Mount at the return of Lord Jesus Christ on the Day of Atonement in 2024. Goat is Antichrist symbolism. Goat stands for greatest of all time. And this is why the 2 goats of basketball wore jersey number 23, Michael Jordan and LeBron James. The GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, played for Chicago, and the GOAT Antichrist, the basketball president, is from Chicago. LeBron James is famous for being from Cleveland and having played for Cleveland and having won the NBA Finals championship for Cleveland, breaking the supposed Cleveland sports curse, which is Antichrist King symbolism, which is why LeBron James goes by the nickname King James. And this was used to point to the president Grover Cleveland, who was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, skipping the 23rd presidency, just like the Antichrist will serve non-consecutive terms, having skipped the 45th presidency. In God's true big picture of end times signs, patterns, and connections, the number 9 is the most important number, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number, and the number 45 is the 9th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 9th row is 45. This is why Michael Jordan, in the exact middle of his career, after having won 3 NBA titles and before winning his other 3 NBA titles, retired briefly, and when he returned, wore jersey number 45 for coincidentally 23 games. And it is why Michael Jordan, in his last game as a Chicago Bull, another city God uses to point to the Antichrist, who is also from Chicago, scored 45 points against the team from the 45th state. Like Michael Jordan, LeBron James also played in Cleveland, then famously left Cleveland in much controversy, and then returned again to play a second time in Cleveland in order to win the championship for Cleveland and break the Cleveland sports curse, which symbolizes the Antichrist curse of Barack Obama when he will return to the White House for his second presidency. In other words, the hiatus in the middle of Michael Jordan's career in Chicago and the hiatus in the middle of LeBron James's career in Cleveland hint at the hiatus of Barack Obama skipping the 45th presidency and returning to the White House for a second presidency. It will be his third term, which is why Michael Jordan won 3 championships and then briefly retired before returning a second time to win 3 more championships. It is predicted that Barack Obama will become the 48th president on November 19th or November 21st, 2023, a few days after it is predicted that Michelle Obama will become the 47th president on November 13th. God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together in order to confirm the signs and connections and to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school and became president in 2009, and will become the president again in 2023. From the Bible, the numbers 9 and 23 both symbolize judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number. The only grandfather-grandson presidents were the 9th and 23rd presidents, William and Benjamin Harrison. The 9th president, William Harrison, died on the calendar date April 4th, 44, which hints at the 44th president. Harrison died exactly 1 month after his inauguration. The name Harrison hints at Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash due to a bird strike and lightning and turbulence in St. Louis on October 17, 2023. And the Antichrist Barack Obama will rise to power and become president again through her replacement, which is what is hinted at with the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, President Grover Cleveland, who skipped the presidency of Benjamin Harrison. The 23rd president, which is why LeBron James, who played for Cleveland, wore jersey number 23. Michelle Obama will first replace Kamala Harris, and then Barack will replace Michelle. Michelle is the feminine version of Michael, which is the reason for the name Michael in the name Michael Jordan. In the Bible, the Hebrews crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Barack Obama's famous autobiography is named A Promised Land. Obama the Antichrist will promise the world a new world order utopia. A goat is Antichrist symbolism. The greatest of all time, the GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, wore jersey number 23 and jersey number 9 when he played for the U.S. Olympic Dream Team, a team that beat their opponents by an average of 44 points per game, which hints at the 44th president, GOAT Antichrist, that wore jersey number 23 and became president in 2009. If you have not already watched the Michael Jordan prophecy video on this channel, the Michael Jordan prophecy video is an essential video for foundational understanding of how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. All right, so also God pairs 44 and 23 together as well. And the reason why he pairs numbers together, by the way, these repeating patterns of paired numbers, he doesn't just pair any number, of course, that's the point. The pairings of these numbers that he does use together is for the purpose of second and third witnesses confirming the matter. And if you think about it, that's exactly how he would do it. In order to develop his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, he would pair numbers together. It's very easy to develop the pattern this way. And so to confirm things. And so that's why in the news stories regarding Tom Brady's return to play a 23rd season, they mentioned how he was or is 44 years old. And God pairs 44 and 23 together to point to the 44th president, the basketball president, that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. And that's why the GOAT Antichrist, the 44th president, also tweeted an announcement on this same day, which was that he had COVID, and also in his tweet recommended that everyone take the VACCINE, which is the mark of the Antichrist, and is not a supposed precursor to the mark of the Antichrist. And one of the main purposes of the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction being made in this video is to prove this. The main conclusions that are derived from God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections are inextricably tied to each other. They are in fact one and the same conclusion because God's big picture of signs is an interconnected web. And proving his big picture of signs proves what I just said regarding the VACCINE. And now I don't have time to explain that in this video, the signs regarding the VACCINE. But that's the purpose of this prediction, is to prove his big picture of signs and these conclusions that I will be stating. Okay, and if that's not appreciated, you missed the whole point of this video and the whole point of this channel. The whole point of this channel is to prove the main conclusions. Okay, so so also on this day, like I said, were these explosion signs that were expected in advance. This was the day that 12 rockets were fired from Iran into Iraq and exploded right near the U.S. consulate in northern Iraq. Okay? And also, this was the day that the explosions occurred at the border inside Ukraine, but just right at the border, just inside it, where U.S. operatives train Ukraine soldiers and supply them. In other words, it's essentially a U.S. base that was bombed by Russia. Hours prior to this, Russia had announced that these convoys and supplying of the Ukrainians made legitimate targets for them. But this was as close as you get to Russia bombing the United States, because NATO is essentially a U.S. organization. I mean, it is a U.S. organization, let's be honest. And this was right at the Ukraine-Polish border. So that's why this also involved the U.S. So you had these two explosion signs involving the U.S. on the date that I had predicted that. But ultimately, in this particular case, because God's big picture of signs is an interconnected web in which one can take an infinite number of pathways through it, this is connecting to the day of the explosion in Iran, as I'm demonstrating. And so that's why it's exactly 44 days after this news story regarding the 44-year-old GOAT and the 44th president GOAT Antichrist. 44 days after this, and it pairs with the number 23, by the way, here too, because of the 23rd season. This is another pairing of 44 and 23. And 44 days after this is the day that Israel will nuclear bomb Iran. It should also be added that the country of Ukraine was made up of 44 million people, and Vladimir Zelensky, which God is using as Antichrist symbolism, which is explained in other videos, is 44 years old. And so this Ukraine sign, which is 44 million people, connects and confirms the 44 days connection as well. Okay. Now let's go back to this 4/4 date when Netanyahu lost power, because from this date it is 144 days, which is also a number that in a way symbolizes Israel, because in Bible prophecy in the book of Revelation, the number 144,000 is a prominent and prophetic number, and it symbolizes the 12 tribes of Israel. And so it's 144 days after this to this prophetic day involving Israel signs. Okay, this date here was 11:4, which hints at 11 times 4 equals 44. This was the day that Israel, for the first time in 3.5 years, passed its first budget. And in the headlines mention the 3.5 years period. In other words, it's this sign and this news story is about the 3.5 years. It's not just a news story that they passed a budget. I mean, governments do that all the time. It's because they passed it for the first time in 3.5 years, which is extremely prophetic because 7 times in Bible prophecy, it is said that 3.5 years symbolize the Antichrist's rule. And by the way, prophecy students will be quite surprised to hear this, but the 3.5 years is symbolism for the times and a half time, not the other way around. Many people believe that the times and a half time mentioned in the book of Daniel and Revelation is some sort of code or puzzle that reveals 3.5 years. But it's the other way around. The 3.5 years symbolizes the times and a half time, which in turn symbolizes a period of tribulation. Even for an individual, one will go through a period of tribulation, which will then be increased, a doubling of that intensification of testing of faith, followed by an easing of that testing of faith when the days are cut short, as it's described in Matthew 24, for example. So there you have it. The 3.5 years, we are already inside. God has already demonstrated a symbolic beginning to that, which occurred on May 2nd, 2021, which I explained in other videos. But the bottom line is that the prediction being made in this video proves what I just said. And that's the purpose. Make no mistake, the purpose for the reason for God giving me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the second coming is on the Day of Atonement in 2024. And we are already well inside the 7 years and also the 3.5 years. All right. I'll give you one quick confirmation example of this in Bible prophecy for the prophecy students that are watching this. We have in Bible prophecy a 1,290 days and a 1,335 days in addition to the 1,260 days mentioned in Daniel chapter 12. Well, 1,290 days is 30 days more than the 1,260 days. And the 1,260 days, of course, as you know, is 3.5 years. But the 1,290 days is an additional 30 days. And the 1,335 days is an additional 2.5 months, 45 days after the 1,290 days. So you have 2.5 months and a 1 month extra period after the 1,260 days, which adds up to 3.5 months. It's just one of these clues or mysteries that God has left in his prophecy to reveal that the 3.5 symbolizes a times and a half, which is symbolism for tribulation. Okay, so what's really, really fascinating, and I plan to make a video explaining this better and how it ties into God's big picture of signs. But the recent discovery of the Endurance ship, the ship named Endurance, which is symbolism for end times tribulation, testing of faith, endurance, patience of the saints, right? Well, this ship was recently discovered in March this year. And anyway, the story is arguably the most dramatic and prime example of man's endurance with the elements of nature and a story of survival. And it begins with them disembarking the ship onto the ice floe and their tribulation on the ice floe. And the camp they set up was named Patience Camp. But that symbolized the first stage of the tribulation, of one's tribulation, the time, in other words, which was followed by the times, which is a doubling of that. Well, that's symbolized by the 2 legs of their sea journey, because from the ice floe, the first leg was through the extremely dangerous and southern Atlantic Antarctica Ocean to Elephant Island, at which point half of the crew were left on it, and then 6 men continued on a second boat journey, which was even more arduous, to South Georgia Island. So that's the times. So you have time, times. Well, the half time is symbolized by, once they reached South Georgia Island, 3 of the 6 men, and again, another half were left behind on the shore. Another 3 traversed over South Georgia Island. Uncharted South Georgia Island, they managed to get across to reach the whaling town on the other side of the island. And that took 3.5 days. That took 3.5 days. So that was symbolism for the time, half time. Okay, so you have the time times and a half time encapsulated in this most epic story of all time of tribulation. So 9 weeks God uses, well, no, let's finish these signs here, because the other sign that occurred on this date was this NASA return to the moon in 2024 sign, which is another, by the way, the reason why NASA's plan to return to the moon in 2024 is because it's a prophetic sign that is communicating that the return of Lord Jesus Christ will be in 2024. Because, for one thing, the moon symbolizes Christ. The sun, which symbolizes God the Father, the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon. Long story short. And furthermore, for example, the Bereshit moonlander, the Israeli moonlander in 2019 that crashed into the moon, was a major prophetic sign that communicated the second coming in 2024. And that's explained in the very interesting Bereshit moonlander prophecy video, if you would like to watch that. But this sign here, what occurred on this date was the court case dismissed of the lawsuit brought by Blue Origin on NASA and SpaceX. NASA awarded SpaceX the $2.9 billion contract for the lunar module. I think it's the lunar landing module, I believe. If I'm incorrect, it's the lunar orbiting thing. Both of these things were given to SpaceX, though. Anyway, it was $2.9 billion was the contract, and the number 2.9 symbolizes 29, which God uses to symbolize the moon, which symbolizes Christ, because the moon's lunar cycle is 29.5 days. And this court case, which then freed up NASA and SpaceX to move forward with their plans to, build these things. The court case had to be resolved first, and so that's why it's an important event. But anyway, this 2.9 billion news story occurred exactly 29 weeks after NASA awarded SpaceX the $2.9 billion contract. And so that's amazing confirmation of this. And speaking of this 29 weeks exact connection back from the day that the lawsuit was settled between Blue Origin and NASA to the day that SpaceX was awarded the contract of $2.9 billion from NASA, the day that SpaceX was awarded this contract was April 16th, 2021. And this was also the day of the first flag raising at the new World War I National Monument in Washington, D.C. This is highly symbolic because of the other signs that God has used involving World War I. But in a nutshell, if it's possible, I don't think so, but in a nutshell, World War I is the rumors of wars that Jesus was speaking about in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, when nation will rise up against nation and kingdom against kingdom, as he said, the beginning of the birth pains, the beginning of the end times period. A symbolic one, because World War I led to the British beating the Ottoman Turk Empire and then ruling the Palestine territory in their Palestine mandate given to them by the League of Nations, which led the way to, for example, the Balfour Declaration, which allowed Jews to immigrate back to Israel, and on in terms of the signs. So I won't get into that. But also World War I is symbolizing the world and judgment on the world and Lord Jesus Christ coming back at the end of judgment on the world. to defeat the Antichrist, for example, in Jerusalem. And so that's why in World War I, it was 4.7 million Americans that were in uniform and 117,000 deaths, which is astounding because the 47th president and Antichrist will come to power during the 117th Congress. And that's also why God is pointing back to this World War I monument, which is a monument to those that died and fought in World War I. 4.7 million in uniform, which hints at 47 and 117,000 deaths, which reveals the identity of the Antichrist that will briefly rule the world. Okay, now this date, 11/4, was also the 99th anniversary of the discovery of the tomb of King Tut in the Valley of Kings in Egypt. And Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, in the Bible, is Antichrist symbolism. And again, the number 9 symbolizes judgment. This was a major thing. I also predicted this date in advance. I predicted something major would occur on this date. And we had all of these signs here. It was really quite something. I knew this was a really huge date ahead of time. One of the reasons was because it was the 99th anniversary of King Tut, but also the 13th anniversary of the election of the Antichrist, Barack Obama, on the date 11/4, which hints at 11 times 4 equals 44, in 2008. From the Bible, the number 13 symbolizes the Antichrist, as Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, persecuted, or rather was the 13th generation from Ham. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews in the 2 13th days of the months, and the 2 Antichrists described in the book of Revelation are in chapter 13. The reason why God did this also is because this date here was exactly 9 months and 13 days after the home run king, which hints at the king symbolism, which is the Antichrist king, but also the king of Egypt. The home run king, Hank Aaron, died 9 months and 13 days before this date. And Hank Aaron is player number 44, which is a confirmation of the date 11/4, which hints at 11 times 4 equals 44. Hank Aaron, in 4 years of his career, well, first of all, his career spanned 23 years, which points to the basketball president that wore jersey number 23, and God pairs 23 and 44 together. And the player number 44, in 4 of his years of his career, hit a total of 44 home runs, and he tied the home run king Babe Ruth's home run record on the date 4/4 in 1974, exactly 44 years before the crash of the Thunderbirds jet, squad number 4, and killing the pilot. And this hinted at the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash, the door through which the 44th president Antichrist will pass through in order to become president again. And the crash of the Thunderbirds jet hints at lightning falling from heaven, which is what Kamala Harris's crash will also symbolize, because Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. And in Hebrew, Barack Obama's name means lightning from heaven, which is explained in other videos. But the reason for 9 and 13, 9 months and 13 days, for example, God pairs 9 and 13 together because 9 symbolizes judgment, 13 symbolizes Antichrist, and so 9 times 13 symbolizes judgment by the Antichrist on the nation, and 9 times 13 equals 117. Hank Aaron died 6 plus 6 plus 6 days, which is Antichrist symbolism, after the first day of the 117th Congress, and that was the day that he took the VACCINE, which is why the death of Hank Aaron is the biggest sign of all in God's big picture of signs that communicates that the VACCINE is the mark of the Antichrist. On the first day of the 117th Congress, on January 4th, 2021, the ceremonial prayer that opened the Congress for the first time ever was a prayer to pagan gods and not the God of the Bible. Okay, also on this day, which confirms all of this, on this 11/4 date, was the announcement from Joe Biden of his details for the mandate to take the VACCINE. And all of the headlines read 84 million workers, because the mandate affected 84 million workers. I had predicted, one of the reasons why I knew this date ahead of time is because it was 84 days after the Field of Dreams prophetic baseball game, which is explained in other videos. But the reason for number 84 is because it reveals the identity of the Antichrist also, because the Antichrist was born on the date 8/4, August 4th, which is the 216th day in the calendar year, and 216 is 6 times 6 times 6. Also, 7 years in Bible prophecy is symbolism for the Antichrist's rule, and 7 years is 84 months. All right, now the thing is, this 44 days and 144 days is also equal to 188 days from this crush event, which is a major woe, and that's what this number 188 symbolizes. The 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, H188, is the word for woe exclamation mark. And so that's why 188 days after this woe, this biggest civil disaster in modern Israel history, were these signs here involving Israel and the Antichrist. Okay, so also another example for confirmation for the prophetic significance of 188 is that when the British landed in 1813 at Mount Vernon's estate, Washington's Mount Vernon estate, on the date 9/11 in 1813, and then burned down the Capitol building and the White House, it was exactly 188 years later to the only other time that a foreign enemy attacked Washington, D.C., which was on 9/11 in 2001. All right, now this video is about Iran, and the signs that I have just explained that occurred on November 4th, 2021, is part of the trail of signs that is leading to the day that Israel will bomb, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear facilities. So we are talking about Iran. And that is why it is absolutely astounding that on this prophetic date here, with these signs that, for example, also include very prophetic signs involving Israel. It was the 3.5 years, for example, first budget, which tied into these other Israel signs, as I just explained, which was the 44 deaths in the Israeli crush, and also Netanyahu, for example, leaving office on this date 4/4, and again, the 188 days connection. Well, this is amazing because this date here, 11/4/2021, wasn't only the 99th anniversary of King Tut's tomb being discovered in the Valley of Kings, and also the 13th anniversary of the election of the Antichrist king in 2008. But it was also the 42nd anniversary of the hostage taking at the U.S. Embassy in Iran. Now, first of all, the number 42 is Antichrist symbolism from the Bible. 7 times in Bible prophecy, it is said that the Antichrist will rule for a symbolic 42 months. For example, God uses the number 42 in his signs as Antichrist symbolism. And as has been explained here, we have a ton of Antichrist symbolism that is occurring in the signs on 11/4/2021. Not to mention the mark of the Antichrist, for example, with the 84 million workers that would be affected by the mandate, and again, the 13th anniversary and the 99th anniversary, right? All right, now 42 months is 3.5 years. And that's why it's also astounding and amazing confirmation for the relevance of this 42nd anniversary, because on this 11/4 date, we have Israel and this first budget that was passed in, the first one passed in 3.5 years, 3.5 years. And 3.5 years, biblical years, is 42 months. A biblical year is a 30-day month. And this is astounding. Well, either way, 3.5 years is 42 months. And so we are talking about the Antichrist as well and his rule for 42 months. But in this video specifically, we are talking about Israel and Iran. And so, in other words, 42 years back from the first Israeli budget in 3.5 years is the Iranian hostage taking at the U.S. Embassy. Now, I'm definitely not old enough to remember this. This happened in 1979. I was an infant, a kid. And so, but reading up about it and learning about it, it's very, very important in history, especially Iranian history. This was a pivotal moment in Iranian history. And there wouldn't be, for example, this need to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities had it not been for this date, 11/4 in 1979. Okay, so just briefly, the students organized a protest at the U.S. Embassy. They had planned to storm the embassy just for a few hours. This was the original plan, to get attention. The goal, they were supporters of the religious leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini, and they saw that as an opportunity to give him support. They didn't actually tell him that they were going to do it, but they figured that he would support it once it had happened. And sure enough, they were right. Khomeini wouldn't have supported it beforehand, though, but after seeing the success of the event and the success of the popularity of it in the Iranian population, he was all in. Well, anyway, he wasn't the leader of the nation at that time. There was there was moderates that were leading the country at the time. And furthermore, there was also a sizable leftist, Marxist, communist faction in Iran as well, which was competing with the extreme religious faction. So you had all these competing factions with each other in Iran, but because of this U.S. hostage taking, the religious leaders ended up winning this whole competition. And right after that, they passed their Islamic constitution, etc. The rest is history, in other words. All right, now, this Iranian hostage taking was also extremely important in American history. It led to, for example, the landslide victory of President Ronald Reagan in 1980, for example. And I won't get into too much details for the sake of time, but the hostage taking is sometimes known as the 444 days hostage take crisis. In other words, that's a nickname for it. It's not just called the Iranian hostage crisis. It's also sometimes referred to as the 444-day hostage crisis. That's very interesting because the Antichrist is the 44th president. And we are talking about this 42 years connection to the date 11/4 in 2021, which, as I just explained, is filled with Antichrist symbolism, and for that matter, is the 13th anniversary of the election of the 44th president. So that's absolutely astounding. The 444-day hostage taking. And it's known by that partly because of the timing that it ended. It ended precisely minutes after Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. And so that's why it's remembered, the actual timing of the amount of days, one of the reasons. Of course, it's remembered because also it just went on for so long, and it was a disaster for the U.S. And I guess also probably it's known as 444 days because it rhymes, to those that don't know prophecy, and also the 44th president is the Antichrist. But also it symbolizes, or it indicates, a spirit of Antichrist in Iran, which we can see from the history onward after 1979 regarding Iran. It's definitely an evil, there's definitely an evil spirit over this nation and the leadership of this nation. And so, and of course, Islam is the spiritual enemy of Christianity. When we look at it correctly, it's clear and obvious that Islam was designed by Satan to counter Christianity. I mean, the whole religion is obsessed with how Jesus was just a prophet, for example, and on and on. I'm not going to get into an apologetics regarding Islam here, which I could. I find the subject interesting, of course. But also, we're talking about Iran, which is located where ancient Persia was, and that's very significant regarding the Bible, because, for example, the number 13 is Antichrist symbolism, because Haman, who was a type for the Antichrist, who was in ancient Persia, as recorded in the book of Esther in the Bible, persecuted the Jews in ancient Persia on the 2 13th days of the calendar months, which is why it is amazing beyond words that exactly 42 years after this hostage taking, the 444 days hostage taking, was the 13th anniversary of the election of the 44th president. Absolutely stunning. And that's why it's amazing that after the hostage taking, after it began on the date 11/4 in 1979, 4 times 4 days later, 13 hostages were released. This was a big event in the whole crisis, how the 13 hostages were released at the beginning of the hostage taking. This was a major thing. But it was 13, and we are talking about Iran, which is Persia, and the number 13 is associated with Persia and persecution, and of course the hostages were persecuted. They were tortured and treated very badly throughout the hostage crisis, and that's why that's astounding. And it was also 4 times 4 days after it began on the date 11/4, which hints at 11 times 4 equals 44, and the hostage crisis was for 444 days. It was also an initial 66 hostages, which is also Antichrist symbolism. The number 666 is associated with the Antichrist in Bible prophecy, and this Antichrist and the number 666 are described in the 66th book of the Bible. And so anyway, this is extremely important, this connection of 42 years to the first budget passed in Israel in 3.5 years. Again, 42 months is 3.5 years. And that's why, again, this date here that I've spent so much time explaining with the signs that occurred on it is extremely relevant in this trail of signs that is leading to the day that Israel will nuke Iran. All right, now, in the most central prophecy in the Bible is the 70 weeks prophecy, and it is broken into 69 weeks and then the final 70th week. All right, and which is a week is symbolism for 7 years in that prophecy. But regardless, God uses 70 weeks and 69 weeks connections in his big picture of signs because of this prophecy. The 70th week also symbolizes the end times period, the last 7 years, which again is only symbolic. It began in 2000. The symbolic 7 years began in 2017, which is explained in other videos. But here, back from this day, we have a 70 weeks connection exactly, and an exact 69 weeks connection to these extremely prophetic explosion signs in Iran. On July 2nd, 2020, an explosion hit a centrifuge assembly facility near the city of Natanz. 3/4 of the above-ground parts of the facility where advanced centrifuges were being assembled were damaged. Iran admitted serious damage to its facility, while Western analysts said the explosion had set back the Iranian nuclear program 1 to 2 years. This was a major event. The New York Times later reported that officials with knowledge stated the blast was most likely the result of a bomb, possibly a strategic gas line, but a cyber attack was not out of the question. The Kuwaiti newspaper Al Jazeera reported that Israel had caused the explosion with a cyber attack. What I am predicting is that this diagram and this particular explosion, for that matter, is connecting with exactly 70 weeks and then 9, and well, as I'll explain in a minute, to the day that the Israelis will bomb the Natanz facility, which is where their nuclear program is mostly located, nuclear weapons program. Okay, and so I need to actually go back here for a second because I didn't finish this. 9 weeks exactly, again, the number 9 symbolizes judgment. 9 weeks are prophetic in his picture of signs. And to confirm that, we have this 23rd number here. And again, God pairs the number 23 and 9 together to confirm the signs and connections. This was the day of the 23rd Street fire in Philadelphia, city God uses to contrast with the Church of Laodicea, because the Church of Philadelphia that Jesus wrote letters to is the only church that Jesus said would be raptured and spared the tribulation. And there were 12 deaths, and the number 12 symbolizes the church. It was also a national news story because 8 children died in the fire, unfortunately. They were all from the same family. They were caught by surprise by the fire. So it wasn't just any old fire, it was a national news story. And this fire occurred on 23rd Street, right near the museum and the iconic steps where Rocky ascends and in the iconic scene of the movie Rocky, the most famous sports movie of all of history. And this 23rd Street fire is located right near the statue for Rocky. And Rocky is rapture symbolism too, because the theme song of the movie, Gonna Fly Now, symbolizes the rapture when people fly. And this was a fire which also symbolizes the church, because Pentecost symbolizes the church and fire symbolizes Pentecost. For example, tongues of fire came down on the disciples in the upper room, which is why, for example, the extremely prophetic massive church roof fire in Philadelphia in 2019, which is explained in other videos. And also the explanation in those videos will explain how this was judgment warning, clear, absolutely crystal clear judgment warning that the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day, which Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. This particular sign that I'm talking about in 2019 clearly confirms that the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day is Calvinism, or sovereign grace, which comes in the package of Calvinism, and free grace, or easy believism, which comes in the package of dispensationalism. And so that's explained in other videos. And when this prediction comes to pass, you will know that you need to watch, or should watch, every single minute of every video on this channel. Okay, so because what I just said is very, very important. It is the main theme of God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is judgment warning for the church that is about to be left behind. The majority of the church. All right, so on this day too was the stock market peak. It made its all-time peak high, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and as of today, the recording of this video in April, the stock market is still well below that high. That high in the Dow, the top tick, was 36,952 points. And if we subtract 36,952 days from January 5th, 2022, we get this day of this prophetic sign in the Philippines. Now, the Philippines, first of all, was at that time in 1920 U.S. territory. And that's relevant because God focuses on the U.S. Some people will ask me, well, how come it is that you focus so much on these prophetic signs that occur in America, as if I'm America-centric or something? The truth is, God is America-centric, and that's the truth. There are only two nations that were founded on not language or ethnicity or geography, but on a relationship with God, Israel and America. And America is God's Gentile nation, and that's why the prophetic signs of the end times judgment warning are revolving, centered around America. And so that's why it was relevant that the Philippines at this time was American territory, because this ship, or this steamer, capsized and 44 people died. Some of them drowned, but most of them were eaten by sharks, which is amazing because this is Antichrist symbolism. It's just, in my opinion, amazing that God would use sharks as Antichrist symbolism. It was 44 deaths due to being eaten by sharks. This pairs with the 23 here, as I just was explained, the 23rd Street fire. And also this date that this occurred, the 44 deaths from sharks in 1920, was the date 11/4, which hints at 11 times 4 equals 44, which is confirmation of this connection to this 11/4 date, which also pairs, which, confirms together, but it also pairs the 23 and 44 pair with this 4 times 4 weeks, which is 16 weeks, but it is also 4 times 4 weeks exactly from this to the day that Israel will nuclear bomb Iran. All right. Now, returning back here, we have also from these signs on the date 11/4, a 69 weeks exact connection back to the day of this explosion in Tehran, the capital of Iran. On July 9th, 2020, an explosion was reported in western Tehran. Officials denied that an explosion took place, but admitted that power had been cut off in the area. According to Western analysts, the blast hit a missile facility warehouse belonging to Revolutionary Guards. Analysts speaking to the New York Times said that the blast had hit an area with underground facilities associated with chemical weapons research and an unidentified military production site. An intelligence official told the New York Times that Israel was possibly behind the explosion. So this was another, major event involving an explosion in Iran tied to its weapons program and was likely caused by Israel. All right, now, returning back to this Natanz explosion, which is very prophetic because, again, it's, I think, going to be about Natanz when Israel strikes Iran. Maybe it's more than just Natanz, though. But I can't see how Natanz isn't part of the explosions on April 26th. But anyway, this date here was 9 months and 28 days back to the crush, which is another woe type of symbolism, just like 188 days. Because G928, the 928th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance, is the word for alarm, sudden destruction, panic, terror. Okay? And so that's why God uses 9 months and 28 days connections. And so there will be alarm, sudden terror, panic when the nuclear bombs are dropped for the first time in an act of war since World War II. And of course, this 9 months and 28 days connects to the crush event, the stampede with the 44 deaths, which was certainly an alarm and panic and terror event, the biggest civil disaster in modern Israel's history. Okay, and so back from the crush event, it is also 9 months and 23 days to this sign. Okay, now again, God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together, and God also does this, as I explained it a few minutes ago. He pairs 2 and 3 together to hint at 23. There was 2 killed and 3 injured. And again, as I explained, pairings of 2 and 3, well, I don't think I did. I gave you the abbreviated version. I apologize. Pairings of 2 and 3 are paired together because God is communicating how he, in the Gospel of Mark, the book of Mark, told Peter that before the rooster crowed twice, Peter would deny him 3 times. And that's symbolism for the Antichrist, because the purpose of the Antichrist and the purpose of the end times is to test people's faith. So, if you will, a lifetime's worth of testing of faith condensed into this brutal period, because time is running out. The second coming is coming soon. And so, in a way, it's the end times and the test of faith through the Antichrist is an act of God's love. One will have wanted to demonstrate their faith once they've reached the kingdom. But it's much deeper theologically than just that. We also need to demonstrate our faith. Okay? Which is what James was saying in chapter 2, and he gave the demonstrations of that when he said that Abraham was justified, his faith was justified when he demonstrated his faith through his willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac, as well as James mentions the faith of Rahab that was justified through her actions. And so we need to demonstrate our saving faith through our actions, our works of faith, not works of the law. The evangelicals are very confused because of the corruption that Augustine and Luther and Calvin brought into the church. But that is another story that's explained elsewhere in this big picture of signs, videos on this channel. And by the way, our faith is demonstrated in this end times period. This test of the Antichrist comes through the mark of the Antichrist, which is the VACCINE, and taking it will be tantamount to denying Jesus. Hence the parallel with the rooster crowing twice before Peter denied Jesus 3 times, hinting at 23, the identity of the Antichrist who wore jersey number 23. It's the reason for number 23, arguably, is this rooster crowing twice before Peter denied him 3 times, because that's the purpose of the Antichrist, to test people's faith and whether or not they will deny Jesus through taking the mark of the Antichrist, which is this coercion to take the VACCINE, which if you take it, the Bible says you will go to hell. If you don't take it, you won't be able to buy or sell or participate in the economy, hence the VACCINE passports, for example. And but you won't be able to eat soon when the volcanoes erupt on December 24th. Food will be rationed to only those that have taken the VACCINE. If you have already taken the VACCINE out of ignorance, not realizing that it is a spiritual abomination, because for one thing, they use in their development aborted fetal stem cells, and also they alter one's genetic code, you need to repent and apologize to God and not take the VACCINE anymore. And if you continue to take it, those that will continue to take it, they are leading to demonic possession. Okay, so I've explained this. Now there's one more connection here, which is 9 months and 27 days. Another thing that God does is pair 9 and 27 together, and 9 months and 27 days, to point to Daniel 9:27, chapter 9, verse 27, which is the verse regarding the end times and the Antichrist's rule. It's in the most central prophecy, but it's the final verse of that prophecy. And it is the 70th week, which I explained down here. The 70th week is described in Daniel 9:27, which is why 9 months and 27 days back, it was 70 injured in this prophetic sign. On July 4th, 2020, an explosion hit the Shalid Medhaj Zargan power plant in the city of Ahvaz. Meanwhile, 70 people were injured following a chlorine gas leak at Karun Petrochemical Center in the city of Mashhar near Havaz. So is another prophetic explosion event in Iran that coincided with these other signs within days. As you can see here, 4 out of the 5 signs here occurred within July, the first days of July. And this was one of them. All right, so I've gone through most of it here. One other thing to mention, a couple other things, is that this Tehran explosion, the first one of the explosions in Iran in 2020, this is exactly 11 months to this prophetic blood moon, which is in turn exactly 11 months to the day that Israel will nuclear bomb Iran. And from the Bible, the number 11 symbolizes the execution of judgment. The number 9 symbolizes judgment. The number 11 symbolizes the execution of judgment. That's also why the events on 9/11 occurred on 9/11, by the way. Okay, now also the date here, this 4/4 date in the Hebrew calendar that I explained earlier, and the sign involving Israel, this will be exactly 66 weeks, which is Antichrist symbolism, because the number 666 is associated with the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. But also, this number 666 and the Antichrist is described in the 66th book in the Bible. Okay, so it's exactly 66 weeks to the day that Israel will nuclear bomb Damascus, which will fulfill Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, chapter 17. And just a few days after this will be the rapture event. And this day will be September 19th, 2022. This is just scratching the surface of the evidence for this, but that isn't the subject of this video. The subject of this video is April 26th. But I just wanted to include that because so much of this diagram is centered on this day here in the middle of the diagram, if you will. So I just thought I would add that, because we are also at the same time talking about Israel using nuclear bombs. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.